Hello. All right, so let's talk about if this new Superman trailer is any good. Welcome to Philosophy All Along, where we try to get deeper into things and see if there's any deeper meaning behind the things that we're talking about. And if you can make it to the end of the video, hopefully I will have said something that you find interesting. So I finally just got to sit down and watch the Superman trailer. And so for some of you, it's already fake fan, right? Like the fact that I didn't see it as soon as it came out. So my apologies for that. But wow, it was really good. It was really good. And there's some things that I like about it. There's some things that I don't. I'm going to be pretty brief because really what I want to talk with you about is the significant difference between my watching it and then my watching it with my spouse. Like the way that I was watching, I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, right? And my spouse, because I think you will tremendously enjoy my spouse's reaction to the Superman trailer. Okay, so a couple of things that I think are of interest to note here that are just kind of fun. One, they do a great job of bringing in the original Superman theme, right? This John Williams theme, but in a very different way. It's like played with an electric guitar, but in a way that really makes me think of a kind of like almost like 1980s rock ballad. So it's very James Gunn, who spent all that time with Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of like reminding us how wonderful, music from that era can be. And so it's interesting because, of course, the original Superman films are coming out in the late 70s and into the 80s. And so this film is modern, it's contemporary film. And its musical styling is definitely a revamp and modernized gesture. But at the same time, it harkens back, but in this, so it's very smart. So kudos, chef's kiss to them for their musical choice in that regard. Some other very cool things, and this is not an Easter egg video. Like for those of you who are like hardcore super fans, there's nothing that I'm saying you do not actually know, right? This is more just kind of a reaction, a little bit talk about was pretty neat and exciting, and what does it maybe mean. So we got Nathan Fillion, right? Who is, we've all been fan casting him as the Green Lantern forever, but as Hal Jordan. And so I'm looking at this bowl cut that he has, which is clearly Guy Gardner's bowl cut, which was always a choice. And to see Fillion in this, right? Because, Hal is this very like kind of in a lot of ways put together, a little bombastic. He's got a little bit of kind of a Tony Stark-ish quality to him, but at the same time, he's also, very dignified. But Gardner was always this mess, just a wreck of a human being in a lot of ways. And so the fact that they have Fillion cast as that, they put him in this absolutely ridiculous haircut, is something that I enjoy tremendously. So that was a lot of fun, and I'm very excited to see what they do with him. Obviously, we see Hawkgirl here, so I'm very curious to see what they do with that, because it's been really hard to do her well outside of the Justice League animated series, right? So without any spoilers for that, right, the way that they deal with Hawkgirl in that is really interesting. So some of those choices, though, harken back for me, and I realize this isn't exact, so don't tear me up too much for it, but they harken back to me to when I was reading the Doomsday, right, the Death of Superman graphic novel, when I was reading those comics as a kid. It's so good. I highly recommend, if you haven't read it, read it. It's really very good. It's short and it's powerful and it's poignant and it's kind of inexorable, right? The trudging of Doomsday towards Superman is this very powerful and I just think well illustrated and super significant moment, pardon the pun, in superhero history. But the reason why I mention that is because when I think about the Justice League from that time, for those of you who are aware, the Justice League hasn't always been these kind of like canonical characters of whom we are aware, right? Kind of the Wonder Womans and, the Batmans and so on and so forth. They haven't always been the Justice League. There's been points in time in the comics where it's like been a whole different roster of people. And so like, off the top of my head, people who came to mind it was the Blue Beetle, right? Was one of the like key members of the Justice League at that time. And if I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure Guy Gardner was the Green Lantern in the Justice League during the death of Superman. And then some others like that you probably never heard of, like Bloodwind, right? And so some really, I think, honestly, very interesting characters. And forgive me for all those that I didn't name. But it's not what the kind of modern audience that's not delving deeply into the comics really even knows about or seen. But I'm kind of hoping, probably completely wrong, but I'm kind of hoping that Gunn will find a way to do Doomsday, because I've never seen it in a way that I really have loved. And I don't need things to be done right. I do not need to. If I want it to be exactly like the comics, I'll just go read the comics. Give me something that's a little bit new, different, twisty, surprise me, sure. But something that is interesting and meaty and significant. And so far, both of the iterations that I've seen of Doomsday, both in Smallville and then also in Batman versus Superman, which was a weird place to bring Doomsday in, were hasty or difficult to buy, narratively weak by my lights. Not to insult anybody who really loved those iterations. I love that for you. For me, it just never really captured the power and the tragedy of what happens in the death of Superman. Okay, so that being said, I'm kind of hoping that with some of these other characters of the Justice League, maybe somehow they're setting up the possibility that they could do something like that. And I think that, especially if, and follow me here, one of the main complaints about the Man of Steel was that people weren't really motivated by Superman because he's not this super hopeful character in the same way that he was in kind of the Christopher Reeve era, that it's darker, right? It's darker. And so the problem is if Doomsday kills Superman in that iteration, like it's not as sad because you're not really connecting to Clark, right? It's not just Superman who's killed and Hope that dies, but also Clark Kent, this just super sweet and wonderful human being who dies there. And so you have to deal both with Superman and Clark being killed. And we don't really get that out of this kind of Schneider era presentation. And so this character that they're presenting in the trailer seems to me one who is going to be very connective with the audience, right? Someone that you're going to be just kind of like with Christopher Reeve, very inclined to care about as not just as Superman, but as Clark Kent. And if he dies, right, how just significant and powerful and important and just decimating would that be? So when I watched it, I was like, cool, I like that. This is fun. This is charming. It's kind of motivating. I hate the trunks. I hate the Superman trunks. I can't. And I know some of you will never forgive me for that. But one of the best days of my life was when the new 52 dropped and all of a sudden he was not wearing those wrestling shorts anymore. It made me so happy. And the fact that they're bringing it back makes me so sad. But, James Gunn has a very good reason for doing so. So in reading his interview for why he did reintroduce it, he was convinced that he should return to this because, and I think this is smart, Superman is such a terrifying character if you really think about it, right? It's basically this all-powerful, super god who, for children, this is terrifying, right? And these trunks humanize him. It makes him a little bit more, circusy, or the strong man at the circus. Yeah, it makes him a little bit more comical, but it also makes him a little bit more human, right? Someone who's a little bit safer, a little bit more colorful, right? And so I do like that idea. I think that's very smart, not just in terms of being able to approach an audience and bring a whole new audience of children into Superman and what Superman represents, which is largely hope, being the best version of ourselves that we can be, right? Someone who has unlimited power, choosing it to use it to help other people instead of, I don't know, to enrich himself and try and convince us to buy really ugly aluminum trucks, right? He uses his power to save people's lives. That's a really impressive something. And so to bring children into that vision of who a human being can be, I think is a great idea. And so the fact that he's continuing to humanize Superman in that way is fabulous. And I really respect that choice. That being said, I've never liked the aesthetics of it, but it makes sense because we spent some time going into a Superman who's really kind of a little bit scary. You probably noticed this, that there's been this point where we've been showing when Superman's heat vision is being used, you see it around here, not just like the lasers coming out of his eyes, which makes kind of sense in physics, but it's also very scary because he looks angry. His eyes like turn red and you see this kind of glowing around there. So it's going to be interesting to see a Superman who is maybe a little bit less terrifying, but not necessarily less powerful. Okay, so this all leads to this final thought. So I'm watching this and I see that they have crypto, and I'm like, my spouse has to see this. Now, my spouse is a Star Wars and Marvel person, right? Like not nearly as much into DC as I am. Like I'm a big Batman guy, and so I'm like, I think you're really gonna like this because this is 100% a kind of like Baby Yoda kind of a moment, but also my spouse just loves like animals, right? And I'm like, this is too cute because somehow they managed to make crypto adorable but not silly. Like so, um, I will say that it's like they lifted it out of a comic book, and that's not my point. I want to give credit to ScreenCrush, to Ryan Airy and Colton Ogburn for pointing that out. They have a absolutely fantastic channel. I highly recommend you check it out on YouTube, ScreenCrush, and where they go really into these deep dives about all of these wonderful things, especially with superheroes. And they point out like this really looks like it's just kind of lifted straight out of a comic book where, maybe with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's like, let's bring these superheroes into our world, which makes sense because those worlds align, right? Like Spider-Man's in New York, for instance, right? But in the DC universe, it's Metropolis and Gotham, and so it's a little bit more separated from ours. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And so somehow they brought this comic, silly super dog into it, and yet I was immediately charmed. So I'm like, my spouse is gonna love this so much, and so we sit down and watch it, and they're like, "Oh, this is cool." I'm like, "Okay, all right." They're like, "I'm liking the music. All right, okay, yeah." Then crypto appears, and I look over, and they look at me, and they're like, "Why am I crying?" Like they're like, "This is the most wonderful thing I've ever seen," because it's not just like cute, but it's like really sweet. Like here's like Superman at, I mean, clearly a particularly low point, and who saves him, but his sweet and loving and panting and happy dog. And so that brings to me my final point, right? Like I guess maybe the philosophical point of this conversation today, which is how wonderful is it that that they are doing something that will hopefully bring other people into our universe. Like I get to enjoy and love the things that I enjoy kind of regardless, right? I will always just be able to pick up my incredibly beaten up copy of the graphic novel of The Death of Superman and enjoy it and love it, right? But most people haven't read it. They're, who's got the time to sit down and do that? But here, with what James Gunn is doing, hopefully, right, is all of a sudden not just appealing to people like me who have the things that they love and we get to enjoy them, but they're finding ways to reach out to whole new audiences, not just younger audiences, but people who are going to see that trailer and be like, honestly, that looks kind of fun. It's not the same thing that we've seen before. And so like some people might be like, well, that's not this or that's not that. But for me, there's a great joy in this idea of we have certain universes that we want to share with other people. This is about a vision that I want to share with other people. And so it's pretty cool that here we have an opportunity to bring people into a universe that is a reminder of who we can be at our best, right? That idea of Superman being not a savior for us, but a reminder that we can lift ourselves up, that he is trying to be more like us in some ways rather than us needing to be more like him in terms of his powers, right? That we have it in ourselves to also be caring and selfless and heroic. And the fact that this trailer is making people who maybe wouldn't have been interested, I think is just absolutely fabulous. So, kudos to them. It's a great trailer. If you haven't seen it, I definitely would sit down and I would watch it. And I look forward to the film coming out. All right. So have a great rest of your day. If you enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe, right? You'll see the subscribes either up here or up here, one or the other. Please share it with other people. Tell them to join in and be part of the conversation. Go ahead, put some comments in, make note of the things that I missed. Tell me about the things that I got wrong, and share the things that you liked. I appreciate it. I will try to reply politely and thoughtfully. All right. Talk to you later.